Come check us out every Sunday at 9:30 p.m. where Matt will be playing through his massive backlog of Steam video games, and join in the fun as you get to help decide what games he plays and what in-game choices he makes. Currently, he is playing through Adeptus Titanicus Dominus. Hope to see you there.
Hello, Fearless Gamers, Matt here for Fearless Games, and welcome to How to Play Battlefield Gothic Remastered Part 6. Before we start this video, if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button. That way you know when more of these videos come out. Hit that little bell icon so YouTube actually tells you when these videos come out. And give this video a like. That way it gets out there and circulates more. And I can also see what content you guys really want to see. This helps me out greatly with deciding what kind of video content to give to you guys. And like I said, it helps out the channel a lot. And we really appreciate it if you could do that. So, with that out of the way, let's continue with the video. So, we've already gone over the basic rule set for Battlefield Gothic Remastered. Everything in parts 1 and 5 is all you need to start playing some practice games and get the rules under your belt to basically get yourself familiarized with the game. Here in part 6 and in part 7, we're going to be talking about some more they're still basic rules of the game, but in the original printing of Battlefield Gothic, these were referred to as advanced rules. They add a little extra layer of complexity to the game, add a few different types of strategies to your repertoire, and add some more challenges to the battlefield. So, we're going to first dive in on this video talking about Squadrons. So, let's dive right in. So, what are squadrons? The best way to describe them is simply as it's a group of ships compiled to create one single unit. In most cases, escorts do this very commonly to keep themselves alive since they are one-hit wonders and their firepower is significantly smaller, so combining them together gives them a better chance at not only survival, but being an optimal threat against, say, a larger vessel. Or in cases of capital ships, battleships, and cruisers, though they normally don't usually squadron up together, this allows them to combine their firepower to make them an even larger threat, typically done in big, grand battles of Battlefield Gothic. In a sense, think of squadrons like a unit of tactical marines in Warhammer 40,000, between 5 to 10 man in the case of Tactical Space Marine Squad, creates one individual unit made up of multiple models. It's the same basic principle here, and because of that, certain rules do function differently. So, for starters, command checks. Command checks are done usually individually from each vessel. With squadrons, you have the benefit of one command check that affects the entire squadron. This is especially great for capital ships because if you have one that has a very low leadership value, you can squadron it up with a ship that has a very high leadership value, and now you don't have to worry about that one ship risking your chances of failing a command check because you're now using the other ship's leadership value instead. And in the case of the one thing that separates a capital ship squadron from an escort squadron in this regard is in a capital ship squadron, each individual vessel will have a leadership value. An escort squadron does not do that. It's one single leadership for the entire squadron. And just like with doing a leadership check for the entire squadron, modifiers apply to the entire squadron. So enemy contacts, or blast markers will affect the squadron, even if you make an argument that it's not the ship that is making the check that has the blast markers in contact of it. Just for example, again, if you have like 2 capital ships and you're using the ones whose higher leadership value and the lower one has a blast marker touching it, even though the one that we're using the leadership of doesn't have a blast marker touching its base, because a member of its squadron does, it takes the -1 modifier. And like I said, with escorts, the whole unit, it doesn't matter. It's 1 leadership value for all of them, so it doesn't matter which ship you pick. It's always going to be the modifiers applied. And with that, the effects of the special order is one effect that affects the entire squadron. So, for example, all ahead full, if you've got 6 ships, you don't roll all ahead full 6 times for each vessel. You roll it once and apply that value to all ships in the squadron. And when a ship goes under special orders, the entire squadron is under that special order. Meaning you can't have half of them do one order and the other half do another one. This also counts with brace for impact as well. So if one ship gets attacked and you decide to brace for impact, the entire squadron now goes out of whatever special order they were on and becomes part of special order brace for impact. So how are squadrons constructed in the game? In cases of capital ships, they are deployed and declared at the beginning of the game. So before the game begins. So you drop them out and go boom, boom, these ships are squadroned together. When it comes to escorts, those are built when you're assembling your forces from your army list. So before deployment even begins, your squadron is formed. You basically are creating the squadron as you're buying your escorts. And unless an army special rule says otherwise or a mission parameter says otherwise, escort squadrons can go from 1 to 6 vessels. Now, escort squadrons can be of any different classes, but they must be all of the same type. So escorts can only be squadron with escorts, capital ships can only be, or cruisers can only be squadron with cruisers, and battleships can only be squadron with battleships. And while you can mix and match your escort squadrons however way you want, you may want to think about the types of escorts you're trying to combine together, because you don't want to end up hampering one squadron by put like a really fast escort by putting it with a very slow escort. And you also don't want to be forcing yourself into a decision of what special order should the squadron go under, because if, like, say for example, you mix in a squadron of into a squadron some ships that are all lance fire weapons and one that's all torpedoes, you can kind of hinder yourself once those torpedo boats fire their ordnance, because you're either going to have to reload ordnance, making the lances get nothing out of the special order, or lock on target, making your lances effective, but your ordnance guys are like, well, we don't get our ordnance now, so our main role in the game is useless. However, it's totally up to you how you comprise your squadrons, but it's best that you try and keep in mind which ships you're putting together to make sure that your squadrons are running optimal in the game. So you have your squadrons formed up. Now it's time to place them down and keep them in squadron formation. What this means is that in order for them to count as being part of their squadron, they have to stay within 15 centimeters of another ship. Not like they have to all be within 15 centimeters of each other, but ship A has to be within 15 centimeters of ship B. Ship B has to be at least 15 centimeters from ship A. They all have to be within 15 centimeters of another vessel in their squadron. If for some reason they end up getting out of formation. This could be from some poor maneuvering choice or ships getting destroyed, leaving gaps in your line. They are now considered out of formation, and they must spend their turn trying to get back into formation with the rest of the squadron. And as long as they are outside of formation, they cannot benefit from any special orders that the squadron goes into. Now, as the ruling for squadron formations would imply, individual ships within a squadron are free to move across the board however they see fit, provided that they maintain the squadron formation distance with at least one other vessel. So you can have one going this way and one going that way. As long as they're 15 centimeters from each other, they're good to go. And in the cases of escort squadrons, if one or more of those vessels ends up getting off the table edge by just some poor maneuvering, then the entire escort squadron that remained on the table must immediately attempt to disengage, and attempt to disengage in every subsequent turn. So with the case of escort squadrons, even though you can move them individually and just maintain a 15 centimeter range between them all, it's probably best to try and keep their movements similar to each other. This way you can avoid any accidental disengagements, forcing you to have the entire squad leave the field unintentionally. So when you're firing at squadrons, there may be times where some ships would present an easier target than others. Like, for example, if you have a squadron of 4 and 2 of them are closing and 2 of them are a beam to the attacking vessel, the attacker gets to choose which ships they're going to fire at. Whatever target category they choose, their shots cannot hit a more challenging target. So continuing with this example, if you fire at the closing vessels, then none of your shots can go to the beam vessels because you chose closing as your category. The only way that you'd be able to hit a more distant target in a squadron is with gunnery weapons, provided you have enough left modifiers and any of the dice that you successfully hit on are not strong enough to hit one of the chosen targets, but would hit the distant target instead because their armor is weaker, which will make sense in a little bit when we talk about allocating hits. But a note here, weapons that ignore armor completely cannot use this weaker armor rule and exploit it to try and get shots on a vessel that it normally wouldn't be able to shoot at because of the targets they chose to fire on. So when a squadron is fired upon, any hits that are successful get applied to the nearest eligible vessel in the squadron until it gets destroyed. Then the next nearest eligible vessel gets the remaining hits applied to it until it's destroyed, until you either run out of vessels or you run out of shots. This only applies to shooting attacks and does not apply to ordnance, boarding actions, etc. And you cannot take a leadership check to try and pick out an individual ship within the squadron. Again, this is not applied to ordnance attacks. And when a squadron takes fire, the only ships that are eligible are ones that are in range and in firing arc of the weapons that that did the hits on them. So even though the entire squadron is effectively shot at, only those that are an eligible target to the weaponry can take the damage. This doesn't now. This same thing applies to like asteroid fields, nova cannons, and ordnance markers. The only ships that are affected are the ones that are physically touched by those tokens. So if you could have a vessel that fires and hits 10 times, but if there was only 3 ships that were in range or in firing arc, or both, then only 3 ships can be destroyed even though you rolled 10 successful hits. So, like in this example here, we've got a Chaos Cruiser that's going to be firing its starboard weapons on this escort squadron. It goes and it successfully rolls 4 successful hits. But as you can see, only 2 of the vessels actually are in the firing arc. So while he did get 4 hits, those 4 hits can only be applied to those 2 escorts, meaning that after the escorts get destroyed, that third one manages to survive because he was out of range and out of the firing arc. Now, there may be cases of a squadron with a mix of different armor values, or could be a case of some vessels may have different armor values because their front and their sides have varying armor values. Like with with Imperial ships, a lot of times their front armor will be 6 and their side armor is 5. So in those cases, either way, there may be situations where you have mixed armor values. So the way you would allocate hits in that regard is you would find the lowest value armor in the squadron that's an eligible target and make note of that. So you would then roll your dice after finding out what the lowest value is, and any dice roll that is equal to the weakest armor value would get allocated to that one, to the nearest vessel with that hit would apply to. And then you would work your way up. So in this example here, to clear this up a little bit, we've got a Chaos vessel and it's going to be firing at a squadron of escorts. One vessel has an armor value of 5 and the further away one has an armor value of 4. We roll our dice and the Chaos vessel manages to score a 4, 5, and 6. Since that 4 is good enough to hit that further away escort and it's within range and firing arc, that hit gets applied to that vessel. The 5 and the 6 go against the closer escort, which has an armor value of 5, because both of those dice are good enough to score a hit on that particular vessel. Even though they could be applied to the weaker armor ship, because it's further away, they must be applied to the closest escort that can be affected by the dice roll. Now, when capital ships in a squadron get fired upon and start getting hits allocated to them to the point where they would be destroyed, you must roll for each individual crit before you declare it destroyed. The reason for this is because, while let's just say you have 3 Dauntless class cruisers, each of them have 6 hit points and 1 shield, and they take on 13 hits. Now, let's just say the first vessel, you first apply 7 hits to it, 1 for the shield and then 6 for each hit point. And while rolling the individual criticals for each of those 6 hit points, you happen on 2 crits that apply an additional point of damage. That additional point of damage ends up destroying the first Dauntless class cruiser faster, meaning that it didn't take away 7 dice from the dice pool of 13, it only took away 5. So there are 8 hit points left to allocate, which means that by the end of it, you're going to have destroyed 2 Dauntless class cruisers, and 1 Dauntless class cruiser is going to have its shields drop because there's going to be 1 hit left over. This rule in particular does apply to vessels that treat critical damage as 1 additional damage that gets applied to it automatically, like a Crew War Sphere or Orc Rocks. And if a capital ship squadron disengages in its entirety, then each individual ship calculates its percentage destroyed individually, and not in the same manner as an escort squadron would. So when it comes to the shooting phase, squadrons are allowed to combine their firepower to make themselves even more devastating, unleashing massive amounts of fire at one particular vessel or multiple vessels. When doing so, escort ships combine their total number of weapon values together and then have it for being under special orders if they happen to be so, rounding up. Capital ships, on the other hand, those squadrons must first have their weapon values, then add them together to calculate their total weapon value. So for escorts, it's total everything up. If they're under special orders, have it rounding up. If it's a capital ship squadron and they're under special orders, you would have each ship individually, then take those totals and combine them together. Now, keep in mind, an escort squadron does not have to have its weapon value solely because the squadron is crippled, i.e. equal to half or less than half their starting strength. And when shooting with squadrons, all rules for individual vessels apply to the squadron as well, such as range, firing arc, and target priority. Now, if a vessel that's close to the squadron is only in the firing arc of some of the ships and not all of them, the ones that have a firing arc to the closest vessel must attack it, whereas the ones that target vessel is not in a firing arc, those ships may fire at a different vessel without making a leadership check, because even though that vessel could be closer, it's not a valid target for those individual ships, like in this example here. We've got a escort squadron of 6 vessels. 3 of them have a firing arc to this Chaos vessel that's 10 centimeters away from the squadron, while these other 3 only have a firing arc to the vessel that's in front of them and 15 centimeters away. Because that closer ship is not within those 3's firing arc, they don't need a leadership check to fire at the one that's in front of them because, as I mentioned, that closer vessel's out of the firing arc. However, the ones that do have a firing arc to that one that's 10 centimeters away from them would need to make a leadership check if they wanted to ignore it to fire at the one that's 15 centimeters away. So how does this apply to weapon batteries, since that's a gunnery table and it's all adding stuff, but there's the facing of the vessel affects what your chart is. And you could be in situations where some squadrons have a beam on a vessel while some are closing on a vessel. So how would you figure out which columns to run your numbers with? Well, the way you do this is you would take each of the ships and determine which firing arc they have on them. So which ones are a beam, which ones are closing, and which ones are moving away. You would then group those ships individually, run the gunnery table as normal, and then total your final results together. So like in this example here, we have a escort squadron attacking this Chaos cruiser. We can see that 3 of them are in the cruiser's side arc, meaning that to them the ship is a beam, while this final one here is in its rear arc, meaning to that vessel it is moving away. So we would calculate a single instance of the weapons value of the escort squadron going to moving away and get the total there, then take the 3 vessels that are a beam, total their weapon values together, and consult the gunnery chart for them. And the final result for both squadrons' dice pools would then be rolled together as one large pool. This makes it all nice and simple, so you're not getting extra dice or less dice just because one ship may be in a totally different firing arc from the rest of the squadron. When it comes to ships firing their ordnances in a squadron, they get to do that individually from each other. But if members of a squadron happen to be in base-to-base contact with each other, they are allowed to combine their ordnance strength together to make one large salvo, with a few restrictions. The first and big one, as I mentioned, they must be in base contact with each other, but they must also have overlapping firing arcs. The ordnance in question has to stay in all contributing ships' firing arcs. So that means if you have, like, say, two ordnance ships, two vessels next to each other, but they're pointed out like this, you wouldn't be able to fire the ordnance as a combined salvo because you can't get the firing arcs aren't lined up. It would only be in one or the other's firing arc. They would have to be pointing in the exact same direction. That way the firing arcs overlap, and when you launch them, they would be within both ships' firing arcs. And with that, when it's time to move the ordnance in the ordnance phase, you do its initial launch measurement from the vessel that's furthest back in the collection. This is to prevent that one that's technically further away from all the other vessels from gaining extra distance traveled with their torpedoes and their bombers and fighters. This does mean that the one that's up front will technically be having their ordnance distance reduced, but this makes it a little more fair and balanced. And that is all for how Squadrons work in Battlefleet Gothic Remastered. We went over quite a bit today, so if you have any questions, feel free to leave a comment and I'll get back to you as soon as I can. In our next video, which will be our final one in this series for now, we're going to be talking about terrain. A set of rules that not only throw a little bit of chaos into your games of Battlefleet Gothic, but can also have a major effect on your strategies and tactics. So keep an eye out for that video. Thank you all for watching, and until next time, fearless gamers, take care.